Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the May edition, the Super Booth Special edition of Molten Music Monthly. The month of May is absolutely dominated by Super Booth, that extraordinary event in Berlin, at Fez Berlin, which over the course of a couple of days just brings synthesizers, music technology and modular to the surface of everyone's consciousness. It's an extraordinary festival of bleeps and bloops and cables and patching and pads and sounds and techno and performances, and it's the one place perhaps where manufacturers get the opportunity to really demonstrate their gear to the wider world, because people come from all over the place. And it's a place for prototypes, it's a place for discussing new ideas, it's a place for getting this potential product out there and interested and hyped with the hope that someone's going to buy this stuff so that we can keep on making it, that we can keep on innovating, and that we can keep on pushing. And I think what I saw from the coverage of Super Booth is that there is nothing wrong with the synthesizer market. It is in full bloom. It is still there. Because I've heard a lot of talk over the last 6 months, year or so about how we've perhaps reached a peak and have now over the other side, and everything is probably in some kind of decline. You know, Eurorack, oh, it's so over, man. We're all going to go back into software. Maybe, but that did not seem to be in evidence. So that brings me a lot of hope. That brings me a lot of excitement. I mean, I think perhaps it would be true to say that the sales of synthesizers in Eurorack are not perhaps as big as they once were when we had this huge bubble over COVID where everyone sat at home going, well, I'm going to make myself a synth. So perhaps we're past that. But it doesn't mean that it's going to fall and collapse into nothing. I think there's a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of excitement and innovation and, you know, hope and positivity around this thing. And honestly, it's easy to make Eurorack modules. I mean, even I've done it, so it can't be that hard to some degree. So it's an ideal place for a little manufacturer with an idea, someone with an idea to prototype something, to put something together and to actually get it to market. It's an extraordinary place, the Eurorack market. Absolutely amazing. Anyway, I wasn't there. I couldn't make it a Super Booth this year, very, very sadly. But I've been scanning the airwaves and watching the feeds and tempering the excitement. And this is, I mean, I couldn't include it all. There's so much stuff out here. So I've been working on trying to break it down to some kind of sensible level. And I've got to what is essentially, I think, my top 30 products. 30, that's a lot. So over the course of the next, shall we call it an hour, I will try to just relate some thoughts on these products, what we saw. And this is nothing against anything that I missed. It's purely the ones that stood out more for me than other things, because there's so much great stuff, phenomenal stuff out there. And I would just like to say thank you very much to people like Sonic State and Sound on Sound and all of the people who were over in Super Booth making the videos, keeping us informed, letting us know what was going on, and just doing such a grand old job of keeping us, who weren't able to be there, excited and interested and engaged with the whole thing. It feels very much like we're there. Almost it feels like we're there. And yeah, I'm just enormously grateful to you, to all the work that you people put in to filming and capturing and telling us about these awesome products. So I'm going to rattle through these as quick as humanly possible. I'm going to try to get my energy up. We're going to go with it. So you ready? Right. Let's get stuck in. From the cuddly named Love synthesizers, we have the First Love FM synthesizer. Now, is this the first synthesizer in the Love synthesizer FM range, or is it called the First Love, as in my first love, is an FM synthesizer? I'm already confused. And I don't mean to be at all. So this is a crazy looking, as in simply, oddly amazing looking FM synthesizer. Now we know FM synthesizers, they're full of parameters, they've got stuff all over the place. You're either having to deal with an impossible menu system to drill down into datas, or you're expanding it into some kind of crazy programmer in order to get to all the parameters. We know this already, we're familiar with the story. However, Love synthesizers didn't seem to get the memo, and so from their point of view, FM is easy. It's simple. You put it into a funny looking box, you stick some big sort of chewy toddler type buttons on the front, and then slide your phone into the top, and you've got a perfectly operational FM synthesizer. Now I'm being a little bit cynical here, only because in watching the videos and hearing the demos, you get this overwhelming sense of, why isn't this just an iPad app? Because the elegance and the beauty of this particular synthesizer, of which it totally is evidently in the touch interface, because that is where all the action goes. And they have developed this quite brilliant touchable, interactive, visual interface that really nails what it is that you're trying to do with FM synthesis. It's pushing these operators, these oscillators into each other and creating that modulation, which then creates these tones, and then which you envelope, and you do it all on this synthesizer on this little touchscreen. It's just quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. I think it's totally brilliant. I mean, it's effortless, as they say. It is also fun, but I still have this nagging in the back of my head. So why isn't this a £2.99 app at the App Store? Why the hardware? Why this hardware approach? And that question for me wasn't really answered in any of the demos that I saw. So yeah, I have questions, but what a gorgeous thing. What a fantastic way to interact with FM synthesis. Bodysynth's Metal Fetishist, great name, extraordinary name, good looking box. Now what this is, as I can understand it, is it's essentially taking the Moog DFAM and making it a bit like metal. By metal I mean like crazy tunes, like, you know, pushing it to its beyond its limits, breaking it in half and rewiring it so that it's just banging all the time. So it's a percussion synthesizer. You have got a whole bunch of things in which you can introduce noise and pitch envelopes and tones and bits and pieces, and you can mix all of those together and then modulate, so you get this constantly ever evolving cascade of percussive noises and patterns. It is all digital. It's got a digital oscillator, digitally modelled filters, digital distortion section, and overdrive and bit crushing, and all those kind of lovely things. So if you imagine the soft, warm embrace of the DFAM, and then just digitize the heck out of it, screw it down inside itself, pull it inside out, and you have the Metal Fetishists. I like the approach. I like the sort of barefaced metalness of it. The nice big knob in the centre, the rust and corrosion switches. I mean, it looks every bit as exciting as the DFAM doesn't, if that makes sense. The Chromplane from Koma Elektronik. It's not really from Koma, it's from some guy who's now making it with Koma. I think they're trying to bring it into life. And to start off with, it looked like some kind of less than one new sort of patch bay strange piece of audio gear. Looking at the video going, so it's got like two plugs in the front, what's this going to do? And then he gets out like a stethoscope and starts placing it on the metal top of this device, and it starts making noises and sound and stuff. And what it is apparently is a couple of pickups or electromagnetic something or others that you're applying to holes on this plane, on this surface. I don't think it was particularly well explained, but also inside there's a delay, and there's other shape shifting, sound shifting, processing, effect-y, typey things in order to push and shift this weird sound. I mean, as I say, I'm picking of the things that I think are the most interesting. It doesn't mean that they're extraordinary or going to be useful, but this one was just interesting because I could. It's like you've got this slab of stuff and you're pulling sounds from it with these pickups, and that was interesting, but I'm not really entirely sure what you're then going to do with that and how you can then process that. And the guy didn't seem particularly interested in revealing everything that it could do. Just going, oh, it does a bit of this, does a bit of that, and oh, there you go. I don't know. slightly mystified by. Also, I mean, the design just seems okay. I mean, it's a plane. You've got this sheet of stuff that you're doing something on. The product doesn't look like it's something that you want to interact with. It looks like you're interacting with something regardless of what the thing is that it's actually doing. I don't know that I'm making any sense. But what I would suggest, if it's not too late, is to turn it into something like this. Make it extend into the world, and then you've got one on each hand, and then you can sort of play it like this, or make it a globe. Surely this flat piece of thing on the ground seems like a missed opportunity of human interaction. Somehow it could protrude more into our space, I think, and then you'd feel like you're playing an instrument as opposed to trying to fault find. It's like a metal detecting. I don't know, but definitely one to watch, because it created some interesting noises, and I like anything that's going to give us an interesting approach to something. I'm just not quite convinced yet that it's all it could be. Now, our friends at Befaco have produced this rather interesting drone voice module. Now, they've called it all sorts of strange things, but I mean, reading it off the page, it's the one eye roll. The one eye roll. It's the one eye roll. That's what it is. I know it has a proper Spanish or Latin name or something, which is great. I mean, go for it. Go for it. That's what we like. We like, particularly in this industry, things we can't pronounce, because that's fun for us. Anyway, what is it? This is an experimental ambient pad and electronic music soundscape generator. You have a sine and sawtooth oscillator. You've got a wave table oscillator. Got a multi-mode filter, 3-band resonator. You've got echo and reverb and a 5-second looper recorder. Everything, of course, can be modulated, and probably should. And you have a powerful randomizer, which can be directed to all sorts of different sources, but also has levels to it and redo, which is an extraordinary idea within Eurorack. So the idea is that you explore this thing, and you generate sine waves, you generate supersaws, you generate wave tables, you scan through those, you loop, you affect, you reverb, you distance yourself into some kind of crazy delay, you randomize back in, and then you modulate, and then you move, and then you re-loop, another 5-second loop or a couple of seconds loop, and then continue like that. You develop and you move and you drone. I mean, this is the sort of thing that's right up Manu from Befaco, I should think, because he loves his noise. He loves his noise and his drones and his soundscape. So this sounds like a really ambitiously taken on, but quite extraordinary thing to play with. Fantastic. With a bit of luck, I'll get hold of the kit version and I'll be able to do you a little bit of a demo. From the aptly named Mad Sound Factory comes the Drop. The Drop Groove Box. This is a funny looking fella. It's not Eurorack, it's a standalone desktop type synthesizer which fuses together a tone part and a noise part and kind of a click part. So we're thinking about percussion, but also thinking about groove boxes generally. So you're combining an analog oscillator with a sub oscillator and then a click oscillator and some noise. And then a bunch of envelopes to run everything. Now, what was kind of innovative perhaps or interesting about this was the row of patch sockets at the top. They weren't Eurorack patch sockets, these were banana plugs. Banana plugs? Yeah, like they use in Buckler and Surge and stuff like that. But what I mean by them being interesting is that you had this array of patch things that you could connect with your fingers. You could just connect a couple of them together and that would have effects on the sound. So you've kind of got this tactile approach to patching, but then you can patch things permanently more with a banana cable and then go on. It's kind of a self-realization of reverse feedbacking into the modulation sector of its own oscillating core. And it's that's driving these grooves and driving these patterns and percussions, and you've got stuck in there with your VCAs and your envelopes, and it's all just rolling and bubbling and finding its way into this mad sound factory of a Drop. From Timeless Garden we get Horizon. This is another interesting experimental kind of weirdo synth for us weirdos, of which there are plenty. I think this comes, in development with the guy who did the Wing Pinger. Wing Pinger, if I remember rightly, is just all about pinging filters and using that self-oscillation, that kind of those ringing tones back to using soundscapes and to drones and that kind of thing. This is more of a melodic approach to that. So it has those sorts of resonator stuff going on inside, but then you can also tune and move and modulate and perform, I think, to some degree with that. There appears to be some kind of sequencing going on and lots of things you can move about on this rather remarkable surface, along with a strange array of touchable stuff and where you can interact with the synthesizer in order to create events and change different bits. If at any point you think I'm just talking complete nonsense, you're very welcome to point that out. Just doing my best from what I can see. And I'm sitting here thinking, you're talking complete nonsense, and I have been, probably for 20 minutes. I digress. I think what's important about the Horizon thing is that it could create strange and weird noises. We are interacting with synthesizers now in order to try to create or produce, emanate these strange, weird, interactive sounds. Because, we've done synthesis. We know what synthesis sounds like, and now we need to start pushing into other areas. And how can we interact with these things? How can we create interesting sounds and use those and manipulate those and harness those for our ultimate self-expression and creativity? And that's what these sorts of experimental things are about. BrainStep is a very, very cool sequencer from Tubbutec. Now, I like Tubbutec. I've got, not in this case, in a different case, I've got their little drum machine thing, which is excellent. This looks really ambitious and interesting, and it has unexpected features in there that are going to make this pretty interesting. The BrainStep. So it's a sequencing brain modulation generator and sample player. So it's a 4-track sequencer. I mean, okay, fair enough, 4-track sequencing. We could do that. It's got a keyboard at the bottom so you can punch your bits in, record your sequence, bash, off you go. But that's fair enough. But you've also got interesting things like gate lengths, probability levels. You've got directions, one way, randomised, and all backwards to the other way. You have an arpeggiator in there. You've got Euclidean patterns and stuff you can throw about. It'll accept live recording as well as step recording, which is something that I look for in a sequencer because I don't find it very often. Sometimes you just want to bash out a thing and let it be a sequence. That's what you want. Sometimes step in, turning knobs. I mean, I like that too, but sometimes you just want to bash out a thing, without having to put in a rest and a hold and a tie and a rest and a note and a rest. So, live recording into a sequencer is something that really, really appeals to me. So, bravo, like that. It has envelopes and modulation generators within itself. And then it's got drum kits. It's like, get to the end of the demo, going, oh, interesting sequencer and stuff. Says, oh, yeah, no, but we also have a sample player for the drums. Oh, right, so it's got a whole drum kits and stuff built in. Yeah. What an interesting idea. I mean, obviously with our modular mindset, we go, no, I must have an individual module for a kick drum, an individual module for a snare drum, and so on and so forth. So it seems a little bit like cheating, really, to stuff that into your sequencer. I mean, what next? You're going to have a sequencer with a synthesizer built in? That's just madness. What are we doing? But yeah, that's the idea, and that's quite... I quite like that. That's quite interesting. On the flip side is a lot of buttons, isn't it? It is really a lot of buttons and a screen. And so that sort of reeks of menus, it reeks of levels, and that doesn't always fly with me personally, but it just depends on how it ultimately works in use. And that's what I'd like to get down to at some point. Knobula had a new module, the Echo Cinematic, which apparently was the first module Jason started working on when he started coming up with all this stuff, and got a little bit sidetracked into the popularity of the Polycinematic, which is probably my fault. I'm going to say that it is. Hey, I've got other Knobula modules, the chord pilot and the piano thingy, that I've still yet not quite managed to get around to doing a video on, which I am sorry about, but I will get to them because all of their stuff is just great. Jason has this intention and this mindset that really works into what he's doing. The kick aim, for instance, was an extraordinary module, is an extraordinary module that I still use and still dig it out, and it just completely transforms your set just in that one module. Anyway, what has he got now? The Echo Cinematic, it's an EQ, it's a reverb, and a delay. I think. Yeah, it is. I mean, Jason comes at it from a kind of 90s dance music, DJ-y kind of vibe, and this is very much what the EQ is about, and the dub delay that's in here. He talks about how back in the day when he was working in a studio in Brixton, which is the ideal place for this sort of thing, is that you would run through a tape delay, doesn't actually matter what the delay is apparently, and you come back through your mixing console and then you would EQ the taps, the stuff coming back. Yeah, so the idea of this is that your signal comes in, and then as it goes around the tape loop or the delay or whatever, it's that is then processed, and that gives it that quite distinctive dubby sort of sound. And that's quite cool. The other thing they've got is built-in recordable automation, so you can twaggle all the knobs and it will record what you're doing and keep that going either on a loop or on a one-hit type thingy-bob, which is cool. I like that feature. That's a really great feature of that Bastl Neo Trinity, things like that. Things that can record knob movements, I think, are quite awesome, and something which I think is creeping in all over the place, which is no bad thing. The Wiggler, version 3, don't know what happened to the other versions, from Sound Workshop. This one seemed to be very, very popular. A lot of people liking this a great deal. It's a desktop synthesizer, it's a mono synth with a quite unique playing surface built in. It has this sort of panel on the top that wobbles about. That's therefore the name, I suppose. It has sort of keys on it, a little bit like a flute to some degree that you can interact with, but then you push into this thing which is floating, a little bit like the Expressive E Touche. You know, it's a thing which is floating in another thing, and it's the floatiness that you get to sort of push into, lean into, that gives you the expressive playing ability to really push into some parameters while you're performing. So you can wobble it from side to side, you can push into it, you know, all of those MPE type things. But this is built into kind of a larger unit, and because it's monophonic, you don't need that individual per note stuff. You just need to do the thing itself, and so that makes those sorts of things that much easier. They suggest that this is designed around the idea that what would happen if synthesizers were sort of evolved through the pathway of woodwinds and flutes as opposed to via the piano, which is an interesting idea. I mean, ultimately it's an analog synthesizer, monosynth, with all the usual things that you've got, but it's this expressive way of interacting with it that gives it its kind of unique innovation. You only have 8 keys on the front, but you can specify the scale and all that sort of thing. And there's a little section in the middle which they weren't showing because it's not quite ready yet, and they're going to bring that at launch, this extra feature. Not entirely sure what that could be. Apparently it's not a screen. Could be, I would imagine it's some kind of looper. Some way of doing sound on sound stuff so that you can build more than just a single line of melody. Next up we have the Manic. Now this is a collaboration between our good friend DivKid and our good friends at Apollo View Modular. They are responsible for the Curiouser and the Rabbit Hole, that great big fat distortion whatsy thingy. They make some great stuff. The All Simulator I built recently. Oh, so everything is in my other case over there, which is great. He's got a great aesthetic, a great grasp of what he's doing, and sound quality and stuff that comes out. And then you've got DivKid, this complete genius who just thinks about things differently. I mean, when you hear him talk about this stuff, you just go, oh wow, he's just like so many levels deeper into this sort of thing than anybody else, than me in particular. There's no way that I could talk about the things he talks about in the way that he talks about them. I do not have that depth of understanding. I am bumbling my way through life when he is, you know, making real choices and understanding exactly what's going on and making the modules that fit in the world he wants to build around himself. And so we have Manic. What is it? Oh, well, it's just a dual VCA, isn't it? There's nothing to worry about. Well, of course it is that. It is a dual VCA, I think. Either dual mono or stereo, obviously, because a lot of things are about stereo these days. Particularly DivKid is very much pushing things through into the stereo domain. But it could do all sorts of other things too. It has, what does it have? It's got soft clipping and surge style wave folding on one side, and on the other side it's got hard clipping and a buchla style wavefolder. So you get a whole sort of cascade of timbres coming out of this thing as you start to manipulate and modulate. You can do crazy things with the stereo field within, you know, the realms of what you're pushing and folding in different sides of the two channels and how they are spread across the field. It's great. I mean, it looks great. I love the PolyView aesthetic, this red, this glow that comes through in slits. I think that's fantastic, and it's undoubtedly going to be a good fun module. I hope with a bit of luck they'll do a kit version that I can build. That would be awesome. The Crum 2 from Analog Sweden is a weird looking box, but it's weird because they gave it to Love Hooten. Hooten? Now, it's funny because the guy mentioned his name and it's nothing like I've ever pronounced it, which is awesome. So, you know, but anyway, I hope he knows who he is because he's a fantastic instrument designer, or a person who takes instruments and synthesizers and builds them into fabulous cabinets and fabulous arrays of stuff. He has such a great eye for design and how synthesizers can look just extraordinarily futuristically retro. That's definitely his vibe, I think. Anyway, he's had a hand in the Crum 2, which is not a great name. Crum. It's a drum machine. What is it? Drum machine. Drum machine in a strange white panel device, desktop thing with a pokey bit and a globby thing. I mean, it looks amazing. There was an orange one I noticed in the video, which I personally would say is far superior to the white and red one in my view, but it's a good looking, extraordinary looking would be a better word, drum machine. Great. It has 4 channels with 6 sound engines. I think you can do like 3 channels of percussion and 1 channel of melody. And it looked ridiculously easy in order to generate beats. You can either tap them in or you can just clock them in and they just start happening. I think the idea is that it's generative, so it has all this stuff built in order to generate its own beats, to generate its own harmonics, and it's that you are wrangling with and wrestling with and manipulating as you're generating this stuff. But I mean, what a fabulous looking thing. It's probably the size of my Big 6 mixer over here. But you know, it's the sort of thing that if you had the size of studio that could accommodate desktop devices like this, then absolutely you should have one. Have it in orange, definitely in orange, I think. It would sit really nice next to something like the Pulsar 24 or the Percons. Oh, there's such a lot of great stuff now. You need great expanses of worktops to put all this stuff on. They did also have a Eurorack module, a filter VCA, a VCF VCA based on the Energizer. Now, the Energizer was some kind of classic weirdo synthesizer back from the day that no one's ever seen since, and is incredibly rare and hard to get hold of. But this is based upon, as I understand it, they borrowed one of these and were able to look into the filter architecture and the VCA and have put together this module that should be out later this year. Erica Synths had a couple of new things on show. First was this ResonantEQ, which is Eurorack module. Nice big screen. They've gone with all this sort of yellowy screeny stuff, which is quite interesting. And it is a ResonantEQ, so you've got these kind of bands, resonator filter type bands, like multiple filters. It's like a I don't know what I'm talking about. It's like a like you'd find on a hi-fi. You know, you've got these bands that go up and down, and then with that you create your EQ shape that shapes your sound. But there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, ultimately this was a multiple filter-based filter array that you could put in all sorts of directions. So it could be a low pass, a high pass, a band pass of all sorts of stuff, or it could just be used to move about, or to be used creatively by shifting harmonics and shifting different frequencies within the sound that you're making. You know, incredibly deep and interesting thing that looked totally brilliant in the rack. 10 bands of ResonantEQ. There you go, 10 bands. 10 was the important number for that. The other thing they had was the Nightverb. Now this is a desktop thing which goes along with their other desktop modules, like the, I can't seem to remember, but what the Nightverb is just a massive reverb with every single parameter out there for you to play with. This is kind of like the antithesis of the Chroma console that I've got here, where you've got sort of one knob reverb, depth, awesomeness, something like that, which I actually really like. I appreciate the minimalist approach to effects sometimes, rather than having to get my hands dirty on absolutely every single flipping thing it could possibly do. Nightverb is exactly that. It opens up every single parameter so that you can control in there the finest detail of where you want those reflections and that depth and that authenticity to disappear off into the universe. It sort of ultimately all comes down to using a reverb as an instrument, as part of your array of sound generating devices. Oh, and the other thing they had was the Bullfrog drum machine. Oh yes, so this is in the Bullfrog, because they had the enormous Bullfrog thing here that I had. I had that here. I had it here. I did my workshop with it, a whole bunch of Bullfrogs. The Bullfrog is sitting over there somewhere. Fantastic, this educational thing with Richie Horton, this desire of Erica Synths to educate and to project synthesis and the awesomeness of that into STEM and into science and technology and music departments, all of that stuff. So the fantastic Bullfrog synthesizer is already doing that. So along with that, they've now brought in, or are bringing in, because it was only a prototype, the Bullfrog percussion drum machine. It looked pretty cool, buttons on it, drum selection, patterns, that kind of thing, couple of little speakers built in. Apparently it's all sample based as opposed to analog driven, which is interesting, which could perhaps open it up for people putting in their own samples, and then it gives it a whole extra new lease of life if you're talking about kids wanting to enjoy making drum beats and bits and pieces with it. So I'm looking forward to seeing more about that as it gets nearer release. OhmForce. Now, I was dealing with OhmForce 25 years ago, I think, when they were making plugins. We used to have some OhmForce plugins would ship with the Caroline audio systems, which was brilliant, a brilliant relationship. I think they were called Fromage or Cheese or something. There were these great distortion plugins that were just sort of fun and fruity, or cheesy in this regard, and they've been making awesome plugins ever since. However, now they've decided to have a go at hardware. So they're essentially porting some of their most loved plugins over into Eurorack modules, which is it's a risky but interesting idea. I mean, they sound great, and if a plugin company wants to maintain its presence not only in the software realm, but also because so many people now are looking to do things externally, then it makes sense that if you can put those into a useful box, into a useful thing that you can interface with and change and modulate, and it brings something new and different, then ultimately you can use the same DSP code in the teeny or the electro music thing that's in the background in the Daisy, and use that processing power to process stuff in Eurorack. Of course, it makes complete sense. And so I think the first one's called the Omnicide, which is a whole load of different distortions in a single box, and there's probably a lot more to come. Moog Music were there with a new 60 HP module like the Mother 32 in that sort of range of stuff, which is interesting. I think it's a good format for them. I think it's a one that can sell well, provided that the prices are under control, but I think it's a great system, a great format, a great size, a great level of affordability and accessibility, and also they're doing really, really creative things with it. The next one is called the Spectravox. This is a 10-band a resonator bank, I suppose, a filter bank. It's like a vocoder. You can use it as a vocoder, or you can use it just as a synthesizer in and of itself, and you're creating these harmonics and resonances and dialing little bits and pieces in. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. I mean, I've said many times that I have no interest in vocoding whatsoever. I find it completely sort of cheesy, and I can't possibly think of a way that I could possibly use it in any sense. But I also appreciate that a lot of people out there love that kind of thing, and that's fine. And this, is for you. But also, it can do far more sounds than that. It can do all sorts of pinging resonant filters in all sorts of interesting ways, and you can ultimately use it to pull the spectral information from an external source and apply that to something else coming through it. Interesting, good, fascinating, proper electronic music, soundscape kind of stuff. Cerebral applying of interesting wave shapes and filtering to things. Yeah, absolutely, bravo. However, there was also a leak just before Superbooth. 2 leaks, in fact. The first one or the one closest to Superbooth was called, I think, what was it called? The Labyrinth. Now this was only a picture of a front panel that we saw, but it looks very much like a West Coast inspired synthesizer from Moog. But there was no mention of it at all. But it looks quite interesting. Far more interesting than the Spectravox, I would say, personally. It's got 2 oscillators. It works as a complex oscillator. It has wave folding, perhaps like the little squishy one. What was that called? What was the little one called? Mariart? No, that was something else. What was the little one called? It's over there somewhere. Anyway, that had a wave folder in it, so maybe something along those sorts of lines in a bigger, stronger kind of way. It has a pattern generator, pair of sequencers, and a patch bay. You know, it looks pretty sorted. It was leaked on a shop website, so I imagine it's something we're going to see pretty soon. The other thing was not really a leak at all. It was the talk of this synthesizer, which I think people thought was called the Mirror, and now I think it's been called the Muse. I might be wrong about that, but it seemed to be a polyphonic keyboard synthesizer from Moog that looks more like, or rather doesn't look like the Matriarch or the Grandmother, that kind of thing. It looks more like a product that you would find from Sequential or Oberheim or something of that nature. A proper keyboard synthesizer with multiple voices and all sorts of other stuff going on. So we saw that through Andrew Wang, had a little bit of stuff on it, and we've seen a couple of pictures perhaps, and some people talk about it, but there again, there's nothing at Superbooth. There was, however, a secret, so I hear, a secret Moog event somewhere, buried in a basement somewhere in the middle of Berlin or something. So who knows? But nobody's telling anybody what it's about, but we can only assume that sort of product and the Labyrinth or whatever, those sorts of things were probably being shown. So could be interesting things to come from Moog. The Arturia Polybrute 12. Now this, as far as I can work out, is one of the finest synthesizers ever made. I'm not going to spend any time talking about this one because there's a lot of stuff out there already on it. It seems to be amazing. I mean, the Polybrute in itself is probably regarded by most people that I know as a fantastic synthesizer. The expressive control, the ribbon, the sort of touche style thing on the side, the sound of it, it's the voice structure, the filters, the effects, everything in it is a superbly packaged product of a synthesizer. And the Polybrute 12 is the same thing, just with more voices, with more expression, more stuff. It looks amazing. I mean, strange grills at the back, perhaps. It looks a little bit too deep for me in some ways, but an extraordinary looking thing. So if you've not heard about that, go and check it out. Go and watch some videos, and I'm sure you will be amazed. Korg Berlin was this little outfit that was put together a year or so ago, probably longer now, which is like, take all the mad people from Korg, stick them in a room and see what they come up with. And they came up with, last year, this twangy thing in a box. Everyone's going, that's quite interesting. We think, what's it about? Well, they've brought it back, and now it's looking a lot more like a product. So in essence, it's kind of electromechanical musical synthesizer thing. So rather than using oscillators, you've got these tines. All right. God, I don't know what's going on with the chickens today. But anyway, so you've got these which I mean, they look like, to me, they look like tines, you know, from a Rhodes piano, that kind of thing. Things that you would hammer and they would make a noise or make a vibration, and you use those vibrations through pickups to then create sound and affect sound and to modulate sound through that. That seems to be the idea. They had it in a much more product type form, where you can hit different things and you could put things and you could physically place things on it in order to affect the sound, because you have this physicality to it. It is genuinely vibrating, and you can affect that by leaning on it or spitting on it or sticking it underwater, or you know, all sorts of things you can do in order to affect the outcome of what's being picked up. So interesting. It doesn't seem to be quite there. They seem to be almost just all quite, and they reckon this time next year they'll have it ready, which seems to be quite a long development cycle, I would have to say. But hey, Shakmat had the Bishop's Miscellany, which is a bizarre name for something. What is it? It's a CV recorder. Apparently they've done this sort of thing before. This is the latest version of that the idea is you stuff any kind of CV into it and it can be recorded. So again, we're talking about live recording from a CV keyboard, something like that. You can record a sequence directly into it. You can record modulation. You can control envelopes. It's a little bit again like the Neo Trinity, the Bastl, where you can record bits and pieces in it, and this is like a larger, more dedicated module to do exactly that. But once it had that CV inside, it also had the ability to process it. So you could add vibrato, you could add glide, you could scale it and stretch it, and then on the other half of the module you could regenerate it. So whatever it is that you've put in, whether it's modulation or sequencing and pitch information, you could then process it with algorithms to trip it up and to mix it about and to pull it around and to use it as the basis of generating further sequences and modulation down the line, which is very interesting. So it's a sort of module you can stick in your system that you can route things through, do nothing with, and every now and again grab hold of some of it and rework it into something else. I thought that was very, very, very cool. Microrack. This is this extraordinary idea that we need something smaller than Eurorack. We already have this a little bit with AE Modular, but this is a slightly different idea. This is opening up Modular into a very, very DIY micro format. So what I liked about it is that you have a breadboard, your standard breadboardy thing, like that. Oh look, I've got wires all over mine. Look, I must have been making something. You've got a breadboard and you have these modules that sit into it, and so use this for signal routing and powering and that kind of thing. You kind of plug these little synthesizer modules into that and then build your synthesizer that way. Brilliant. What a great idea, because it's going to be relatively cheap. It's going to be very much hands-on, where you're going to have to understand how signals route and work and how power works in order to get it to function. But you can put all these different modules together. They also reminded me a little bit of that Korg thing, the little bits. Was it from Korg? That kind of stuff. So great fun, very colourful, lots of lights going on. The demo of the sound itself was not particularly inspiring, but as a concept, as a way of getting into education, as a way of getting people interested in electronics, I thought it was a great idea, well worth pursuing. A lot of patch wires all over the place. He had these particularly special patch wires that he was very proud of, that don't get in the way or something. I'm not quite sure whether they repel your fingers as you go in. Who knows? Anyway, it was a nice idea. It could be a flyer. It could work. You never know. Bastl had a couple of things. First thing was a Crust. Again, Crust which is like their pizza range, same hardware, but this is a percussion synth. Now this is a good old, a lot of it about modules that make percussive sounds in a single linear fashion. This is going back to the Basimilis Arturia Alta, the Mind, what's it over there? What have I got? The Mutant Brain, This Is Not Rocket Science thingy wobbler, the zaps. You see, I do hold these things in my head somewhere. They are in there somewhere. Anyway, so it's a module that generates percussive sounds. You've got a tone and you've got a noise, and you can mix and fade between the two. It's a little bit more than crossfading. It's not just simply crossfading. You've got elements which can be included at various points. You've then got modulation, because of course you need the modulation to change the sound. So if you run a bunch of triggers into it, you can either get the same sound or you can modulate it, and it will wang about and pick out different percussive sounds as you go. Great. I mean, it sounded absolutely phenomenal. I really liked it, to the point at which it's going, maybe that's the one. Because I also quite like the form factor is relatively compact and yet still performable with that jaunty angle on that slider and bits and pieces. That's quite cool. So I like that a lot. The other thing they've got is this, the Thyme Plus, which they were good enough to send me, which is nice. Now, what this is teaching me is that I don't actually have any clue as to how tape delays really work. So this is the idea of this, is that it's what it says on the back. It's a sequenceable robot-operated digital tape machine. Great. So I plugged it in, stuck stuff through it, and I couldn't work out what it was supposed to do. But I will. I'm going to spend a bit more time with this, because I know some people have really, really rated it, and I'm going, I just don't get it. But I will, Bastl. I promise. I'll spend some time with it and I'll work out what it's supposed to do. I don't know. I will work it out. I'll give it some time and I will work it out. But it's apparently very exciting. And you have these presets. So it's kind of a delay, but it's more than that. It's a strange kind of delay that can do strange things. And you have this robot that does things for you, I think. I'll get to that. The PWM Mantis, we've seen this knocking around, was it at least last year, if not more? It was at Synth East, I seem to think, and I saw it at Bristronica or something along those lines. Some show or other, I definitely saw it and had a poke at, and it totally wasn't working. Now it is. So what is it? Well, it's a synthesizer that comes from the history of things like the Oscar. It's got digitally controlled oscillators through an analog signal chain, through a pair of extraordinary filters which have an enormous amount of bite and grit to them, with this analog architecture which ends up producing extraordinary sounds into an effects engine at the end. So it's an attempt at doing a synthesizer in a keyboard regular fashion. It's not modular, it's a proper synthesizer. It has a relatively characterful and unique sound, and I think it could be a very interesting addition to anyone's synthesizer collection. It brings a slightly weirder texture, a different timbre like the Oscar did, like the Wasp does. Those sorts of synthesizers that are just on the edge of falling apart, like the Malevolent did beforehand. Now, the big news on this, that now they've got it sorted out and it actually works, is ended up being 4-note polyphony, which is quite exciting. It's kind of a duophonic architecture because you have these two filters, but somehow it's also completely articulated through 4 voices. I'm not entirely sure how the maths on that is working, but you can play 4 notes. That's probably what's most important about that. So yeah, that's looking and sounding really, really good now. The 4MS Meta module. This is something did we see it at NAMM or was it last year? We saw glimpses of this thing and everyone was very much contemplating what on earth this thing is about. So it's a module, quite a big module, sort of a wobble of knobs across the front and this whacking great big screen, and on the screen what you get is kind of a subset of VCV Rack. You get those modules from VCV Rack on a screen, on a module, in your Euro Rack. This is both brilliant and ridiculous. It sort of stirs me up in that, oh wow, yeah, no, that's great, because I can use all of these, because it comes with 160 modules. It's open to third parties porting their modules across, so there's hundreds and hundreds more that could come along. So you could have this bank of pretty much every module you could think of in a single module. It has shades of the disting in that. It's potentially that kind of thing. But rather than having a completely cryptic distinct interface, you have a picture of the module itself on the screen, which you can then do stuff with. And not only a single module, you can patch it together in as enormous a patch as you could possibly imagine. I imagine there's some kind of limit to that, but you can create patches within it with multiple modules. I mean, it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. But I could not I could not want it less. I don't want it. No thank you. No thank you. I do not want to spend time on this interface dialing down into the software interfaces of stuff. Nothing is further from my internal desire and usage of Eurorack. I don't want it. That's all I've got to say, really. I mean, it looks like a phenomenal module. I think it's going to be awesome. I think there's an amazing amount of uses for it. The fact that you could port a patch from VCV Rack into this and then use it within your modular is absolutely extraordinary. All of that is fantastic. It's not for me. Thank you very much. From This Is Not Rocket Science, we have the Geometric Anomaly synthesizer. This is an entire voice built into a nice big panel that is going to fry your brain like most rocket science stuff does, but in delicious and interesting and wonderful ways. It's fully analog, dual oscillator, 2 filters, 2 envelopes. It's an entire complex oscillator voice within quite a large front panel. It's got cross modulation in there, you can do strange things between itself, and you've got a sub oscillator to underpin the harmonics. It's something just to be listened to, I think. It's difficult to know exactly where that would fit. It's like taking an enormous synthesizer and paring it down to something a little bit more manageable in size, but it's still pretty huge in Eurorack terms. But it's the sort of thing that you could sit down and just enjoy and explore and push around the place, and it has the style and aesthetic of This Is Not Rocket Science, which is a beautiful, wonderful and extraordinarily life-giving thing. Apparently Stein built it for himself for his birthday or something along those sorts of lines, but Priscilla thought it was good enough to get out there into the world to everybody else, which it certainly is. I mean, it sounded totally amazing. The clashing of these oscillators, the frequency modulation and cross modulation between them, great timbres coming out of it. Yeah, an extraordinary piece of work. The Oberheim TEO-5. This is Oberheim's version of the Take 5, I suppose, the sequential sort of scaled down Prophet 5. This is a scaled down Oberheim. I think the intention behind it, I mean, it uses a very similar shell and size and stuff to the Take 5, and I think the idea from both of them is to try to produce a synthesizer which is a little bit more accessible and reachable by the rest of us. The rest of us who don't have $3,000 to put down on a proper synth, to put down on a Prophet 5 or the Oberheim X8, that kind of thing. And it's great, isn't it? It's great that Oberheim want to provide this sort of accessibility in a beautifully put together instrument. Now, of course, you could argue that this is all because of Behringer undercutting them by lots and lots of things and stealing all their work. Yeah, maybe, but that's the one positive aspect you could possibly pull out of Behringer's psyche, is that it is encouraging manufacturers to look at being more affordable, but hopefully in ways that don't compromise what it is they're ultimately trying to do. So we end up with this TEO-5, a 5-voice Oberheim SEM filter. Sounds exactly like you imagine it's supposed to sound like, but it also has some more sort of up-to-date features like a modulation matrix, some differing LFOs, and cross-modulation with through zero FM. So you can do all the regular FM stuff, but you can also do the more tuneful through zero FM. It looks and sounds amazing. I mean, obviously it's not huge, it's more compact, but then that actually works. I think personally, something a little bit more compact in a keyboard. It's packed full of knobs and interesting sounds, and the ability to shape those extraordinary filters and those amazing VCOs in this analog playground of synthesis. It's great. Now, of course, thank you, Cockerell. Of course, I have to mention the Behringer at this point, because there's been a bit of a flurry about this online with the release of the TEO-5, and also who said what to who, said when to who, and who could do what. Because Behringer have released the UBXA, which is their take on the OBXA, the original Oberheim keyboard, which they say is not a clone, it's more of a using that as an inspiration in order to produce something else. Now, there's no doubt that the Behringer keyboard has more going on for it, with its 16 voices, its polyphonic aftertouch, and an extraordinary price of just over $1,000. It's an amazing thing to have captured the essence, perhaps, of an Oberheim synth in that way and to offer it at such a great price. That's great. Nothing wrong with that necessarily. So why would you buy the TEO-5 over the top? Well, I think in one respect the UBXA is an emulation. It's a recreation of something, whereas the TEO-5 is actually the real thing, built by the people and the designers of the original stuff, in an original way that's not just harking to the past, but is also looking to the future. And I think that's interesting. Is that worth a couple of £100 more? Maybe, but that's entirely up to you. As to whether Tom Oberheim has given consent to the UBXA, I think I remember the conversation. I think the conversation went, somebody asked Tom, do you mind that Behringer's using UBXA? And he went, so I don't really care. I think that's the level of consent that he gave. So when Behringer say, oh yeah, no, we had this agreement and this conversation and we had this, this collaboration. No, it's just nonsense. Somebody asked Tom the question and he says, yeah, that's all right. And that, I think, is the level of permission that Behringer have. I think that is what they've got to go on. And that's all right. that's all right. Just carry on. There's no need to get some kind of funny about some official endorsement that you never really got. That doesn't seem to make any sense. So Behringer, just calm down. You just need to relax. You know, you've got plenty of people buying your synthesizer. It's the best-selling synthesizer out there. So, you know, relax. Get on with it. Do your next thing. You know, whatever. We're all kind of past it now. Pittsburgh Modular released their Voltage Lab 2. Now, when they released the Voltage Lab 1, it was something that I bought just as I got on the plane to go to Superbooth to see it, because it was on Kickstarter, and I backed it thinking, oh, this is an amazing thing. And then went to Superbooth and then spoke to Richard. This is before, this is the first time I met him, I think, and he talked me through it, and I thought, yeah, no, it's great, it's definitely great. Then when I got home and it finally arrived, I struggled with it. I found it difficult because it's not the sort of synthesis that I was used to. It's very much West Coast inspired, and that was more difficult than I imagined. However, I'm now older and wiser, and I've done a lot more stuff since then. So the Voltage Lab 2 has come along, and they shipped me one, which is delightful of them. And I was able to do a really, which I thought was an interesting kind of play and sound demo of just me exploring the synthesizer. So that's out on the YouTube channel if you want to go and check that out. I'm not, however, doing a review just at the minute, because my one is not completely functioning in every way that it should, which is a shame. But it was a pre-production model. It's not one of the ones that you'll be able to buy in the shop, but hopefully I'll get hold of a proper working one to give it a fair shake. But what's remarkable about it is those oscillators are extraordinary. They can be bent into all sorts of different shapes and ways. There's no filter. It's all about the dynamics. It's all about the envelopes, and it's all about the low pass gates. And those are really interesting too, and they do provide a level of filtering actually, which is very reminiscent of subtractive synthesis, but actually isn't. So you have sort of flavors of more traditional synthesis in there, along with all of this Buchla inspired strange beeps and strange noises and movement and stuff. And then you've got this second half, this bottom bit, which is this extraordinary 3-channel controller where you can control 2 different oscillators and modulation, all from this thing. But it's got a whole bunch of digital generation stuff built in so that you can generate patterns and movement and sequences and do all sorts of interesting things with it. It's a fascinatingly deep exploration of modular synthesis within this extraordinary looking console synthesizer. So I look forward to playing with a fully functional one sometime soon. The Enjoy Electronics D-Feel, I believe it's called. The D-Feel is an extraordinary looking module. This from an Italian company that produced that Mother 32 size sort of effects and audio processor. This is something very different.
And one more time with the same
It looks totally amazing. So it's a Eurorack module, right, that has these sort of shapes on the front. Now that's a touchscreen and you can create different modulation shapes. Now the idea of it, as I understand it, is you pump a sequence in and the sequence goes through and it's clocked, and you say that on step 8 I want it to do the thing that's on the screen. So it just lets the sequence go through, and then at the appointed time it squirts out all of this modulation and moves stuff about. So you can have that plumbed into your filter or into the depth of your effect or into an envelope or whatever. So it's kind of like a bank of modulation that you set up and program beforehand that then gets squirted out whenever you want it to be triggered, which is really interesting. And it's not like it happens in one instant. It also travels in time, so it's kind of automatable to some degree, or at least it's passing and following time and going along and doing a thing. So it's like a modulation generator that can be run and triggered by your incoming sequence. Looks amazing. Totally aced that touchscreen look, I think. So yeah, very interesting. Black Corporation had their ISO 9, I think it's called, their Jupiter 8 emulation recreation inspired by Watsy Fleming. They have a single voice of it, like they did with the Descartes Dream. Descartes Dream has this Descartes voice, which is one of just the most amazing modules that I have in my system. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And this is one voice from the ISO 9, which is They're similar recreation of a classic synthesizer, but a single voice that you can stick into your rack. This one's quite interesting in that it comes with an expander which has all of the CV ins and outs all over it, so you can properly get in there and move stuff about, more so perhaps than the Deckard's voice. This has come up before, we've seen it before, it's really just good to see it now becoming available. Toastal Tech was showing the Ectotech drum and bass sampler. I don't know drum and bass necessarily, but the idea of this module is that it takes stuff that's coming in and it completely reworks it. It's a resampler, regroover, slicer, dicer kind of thing. Stick stuff in. It's got 2 knobs, Amen and break, apparently, which I think that's quite funny. And one of them slices and the other one dices and shuffles and reshuffles, so it's a great way of creating breakbeats and stuff that's coming in. So it's a sort of module you could drop into your unit, stick your boring drum patterns in and rework them on the fly. I think that's generally the idea. Does loads of weird re-triggering stuff and backward banging bits of boingingness. From Acid Rain we have the Memo Synth. This is a desktop modular synthesizer that doesn't use patch cables. The idea behind this is that you're using buttons in order to route modulation all over the place. Again, the concept is to just remove the cables out of the equation, so you're no longer having to try to fit your way through it. You know, okay, there's some legs in that. Although many of us do like all of this. I like it. However, the other advantage is that you can save your patches. Because it's all digitally controlled, it's all buttons and lights and stuff, you switch all the stuff on and everything is patched, and then you can save that patch and recall it. I mean, what a crazy idea is that? Recallable modular synthesizer. Just extraordinary. Yeah, so that was looking interesting. I mean, it's a beautifully laid out and a lovely piece of equipment, it looks like to me, and could be, it could catch on. It could be really interesting. And finally, I think this was something that wasn't covered particularly well. I didn't think so. We didn't see very many videos on it. Just a little bit from Jeremy's video, and this is from Rabid Elephants. Rabid Elephants. I don't know what I'm talking about. Losing my sense of self at this point, having talked for an hour and a half. I saw a little bit of it on Jeremy's video that he did it from Red Bean's recording. And this is the Rabid Elephants sequencer, unnamed sequencer apparently, but it looked fascinating. You got these tall dual level potentiometers where you can turn the bottom and turn the top and they all light up. You had sort of clacky keys along the bottom for the sequencing. That's about all we know. All I can say is it looked really interesting. Now, of course, the chances of actually obtaining anything from Rabid Elephant are relatively small because they make small runs of stuff. You've got to sign up many years in advance in order to be in with a chance of getting hold of one of their natural gates or something along those sorts of lines. But they make beautiful boutique Eurorack modules, and this seems to be another one that they're fiddling with that might well come to fruition at some time soon. So there you go, there was a whole load of stuff. Fascinating, innovative, interesting stuff to get our teeth into and to struggle with and wrangle with and try to decide what our hard-earned cash is perhaps going to be investing in at some time soon. Just tons of stuff. I'm really devastated that I wasn't there, and I'm sorry to anyone who hoped to see me there. I will hope and endeavour to try to be there next year as best I can. As terms of other shows go, this year the only thing I'm going to be able to make is Brastronica. But I would also like just to punt out there that Synth East is coming next year, next February, end of February, something like the 21st, 22nd, something like that, February 2025 for Synth East back in Norwich. It's going to be extraordinary. So put that in your calendar. Otherwise, what do I have coming up? Well, all sorts of things. I've got to do a review on the Algo from RYK. I've got the Thyme Plus, as I mentioned that. Got the Plasma Voice in here. That's an extraordinary thing. Be doing videos on that. Got the Black and Blue Foxtrot filter here also. Fantastic. They were at Super Booth with this and their 4-channel VCA. It's an amazing thing. It's 3 filters in each of these 4 channels of filters that you can lock together or not. It's an extraordinary source of sculpting. Also coming up, I've got a review of the Play Fader, which is probably the funnest module device to come along in a long time. So looking forward to getting stuck into that. I have the crazy ER patch machine to do, all about patching your stuff from one machine to another. And amongst all of this, I've got tons of DIY to get stuck into. I've got music to make, I've got ideas to do, synthesizers to play with, and no end of writing to do. So I'm a busy boy, lots and lots to do. Shall we try to do a live stream this Sunday? I'll think about it. I am actually away camping at the weekend, but I'll be back, so we could do a Sunday night, get together and chat. I will confirm on the Sunday itself, but just assume that at 8 o'clock on Sunday we're going to have our Molten chat, and we'll go from there. We can talk about new things, old things, things coming up, make some music, play with some new stuff, that kind of thing. It'll be fun. It will be fun. And hopefully, with a bit of luck, next month I'll be able to introduce you to the second Molten Modular module. So have a little bit of a think on that. And I hope that was helpful. And in the meantime, go make some tunes.